tell you the best Christmas gift you could ever give a teenager. And 80-90% of the teenagers I see and I work with have no goals. They need to be pushed. They need to be pushed. This man was pushed through an amputee issue. 7 years ago, he was here, and we crisscross at Fairview all the time. I do my animal thing, and he does his thing. And so anyway, I highly recommend you consider. A lot of what he's on his talk today will be in that book. And so I just highly encourage and get your thinking caps on. And I hope and pray that if you do suggest someone to help your guy or gal, that you have a support system, because he could not have done it without his coaches and his family. He couldn't. It's got to be a team thing. So just understand the context of this. So I introduced to you Brad Hurtig. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jack. Appreciate that. Well, good morning. It's a privilege to be here and be able to share my story with all of you. I also just want to share quickly, my wife joins me as well, Brittany. We just got married about 2 years ago. So she's actually from Wilmer, Minnesota. So I met her on the road speaking at her church about 5 years ago, convinced her to move to Ohio with me. She did that. We're glad to be here. And she's also, if I can share this, she's 12 weeks pregnant. So so we're super excited about that, our first one. So yeah, God's blessed us, and we're looking forward to being parents as well. So Jack kind of mentioned, from this area, Northwest Ohio. I grew up with a mom and dad, 3 older brothers. I think we got a picture of my family as well. So I have a twin named Chris. He entered our family a whole 2 minutes ahead of me. I'm in the far left. He's in the middle there. Mom and dad, and those other 2 brothers as well, Jeff and Brian. So it was a lot of fun growing up here in Northwest Ohio, attending Fairview. Sports was a big part of my life, playing football, basketball, and baseball. And even as a sophomore, I was the record-setting linebacker, broke our school record for tackles in a single season. And I was really excited about my junior and senior year. And then most all of that changed for me in a single night. Now, I don't know about you, but I believe that God is a unique story writer, and I believe he is writing a unique story in each of our lives with his grace. And I come this morning to testify to that, and my encouragement for you would be to consider the story that God is writing in your life with his grace. So to start, I'll start with my story. After just finishing my sophomore year of high school, a couple of days into summer break, my family and I were actually over helping my older brother clear some brush around his house. While we're doing that, a good friend of mine named Keenan called. His dad owned a factory in town, and he was calling to see if Chris and I would be interested in working that night. And, of course, at the time, we were kind of excited about this, helping out our friend and earning some extra money. But we hesitated because in order to work that night, 3rd shift, we were going to have to be awake for 24 straight hours. And so we kind of hesitated, but we thought, we're young enough, we can handle it. So we said yes. And we got to that factory later that night, about 9 o'clock at night. Found out we would be operating a 500-ton power press, or mechanical press. Does anyone in here know what I'm talking about when I say a mechanical press? Not really. Okay, a couple of you do. Okay. So myself at the time, though, I had no idea what that was, and it sounded really cool at the time, but I found out really quick it's this huge machine used to bend, form, and put holes in a piece of sheet metal to make car parts. And it takes a lot of force and a lot of power to do that. And I actually remember as we were sitting in our cars in the parking lot, we could feel the vibrations of when the press would come down and stamp the metal inside. And walked in that night, got introduced to this massive machine. So it's like 25 feet tall. And they actually cut out the cement and put the machine in the ground another 5 or 6 feet deep. But as powerful and as impressive as that machine is, what we had to do that night was just move these pieces of metal about the size of a piece of paper from one station of the press to the next station. So there were 4 different stations within the press. And so we developed a method where the 3 of us would just step up to the press, move the piece of metal down one station, step back away. My friend Keenan then had to turn his back to the press so he could reach over to push the buttons. And that, of course, would activate it, so it would come down and stamp the metal and then go right back up again. So I was working well throughout the night, and we didn't have any issues at all until about halfway through. So it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. We moved the piece of metal, we stepped back. I happened to notice that one of these pieces wasn't quite lined up right. So it was just sitting crooked. And, I knew that if the press would run, it was going to ruin that part. And so I instinctively reached back into the press to move that part, not knowing that my friend had already turned his back to push the buttons. And so as I'm reaching in, this 500-ton power press that you can feel running while standing in the parking lot comes crashing down while both of my hands are inside. Now, the first thing that I remember was not the physical pain or really even a physical sensation. The first thing that I remember was hearing someone else screaming something at what they saw when they looked at me. I knew this was not good, and I left the press, took off running towards my boss to get help. But before I got to him, I thought, I really need to see how bad this is. And when I looked down, it was not very good. But it's actually easier for me to show you as it is to try to explain it. So if you don't mind, this is basically what I saw when I first looked to my left side. I say basically because part of my hand was actually still attached. And the doctors were trying to save what remained of it. They just were not able to. I remember seeing that and thinking, this is really bad. And I just hope my right side is a little bit better. And as I look over to the right, it was actually worse. Half of my arm was just missing. And after seeing this, I remember thinking, that's really bad. I do not need to see that again. And my boss actually gets to me, and he's in shock. I've never seen his eyes so white, so big. He doesn't really know what to do, but he quickly grabs me by the back of my shoulders. He leads me off to his vehicle, and we speed off to the local hospital. And it wasn't a very long drive, but there was enough time for me to think. And I started thinking about my life, how different it was going to be, and how I was never going to play sports again. And for me at the time, sports was a really big deal. And I just started hysterically saying that out loud. I'm never going to play sports again. I'm never going to play sports again. Being a 3-sport athlete, a record-setting linebacker, but now I didn't have hands. And I so desperately wanted to go back in time, in just a couple of minutes, and change what just happened, but I couldn't. I don't know if you've ever done something, maybe said something where you instantly regret it, and yet no matter how bad you feel, you can't go back and change it. So when I'm getting to that first hospital, I didn't stay there very long. I was actually in bad enough shape. The doctors bandaged my arms up. They put me in a helicopter. I ended up getting life-flighted to a larger hospital, and I'd stayed there for 11 days going through multiple surgeries. I never liked having my picture taken. This is actually the last day there. And one of the biggest reasons is I didn't like the way I looked. And it was just hard for me to accept that. And so I basically came home to start a new life without hands. So if you would think about that for a moment, how often do you use your hands? Right? All the time, right? For everything. I didn't just lose one, I lost both. But something I found that was so true is that God was bigger than my accident, and that he was greater than my loss. And I say that because, one, I had a relationship with Jesus already. So I grew up in the church, grew up going to church my whole life. My mom would come in and pray with us before going to bed and taught us how to pray and reading the Bible and all of that. But it was at a younger age that I come to realize my need for Jesus and putting my faith and trust in him. And so I believe that he has been with me ever since. So life is good. And then this accident happens. And it's like, God, where are you? Like, if you're good, how do you let something so tragic happen? Right? And it was such a hard thing to kind of process and understand. But one, who says God isn't preventing 99% of the things that could be going wrong in our lives? I think he does more than we ever recognize and give him credit for. And one of the things I found through this experience was that God's grace was sufficient. Now, when I say God's grace, I don't know what comes to mind to you. But for me, when I think about God's grace, I had always thought about God's favor in our lives, his provision. I think about his goodness towards us. And I love the acronym of grace, if you use grace as an acronym. So God's riches at Christ's expense. Right? The great exchange of the cross. The worst about you and me laid upon Christ, and the best of Christ laid upon us. But even beyond all of that, something that I experienced through this accident and really learned about was grace as a source of strength. There's a verse in 2 Corinthians 9:8, and there it says, "And God is able to make all grace abound towards you, that you, always having all sufficiency in all things, may have an abundance for every good work." It's pretty clear. God has exactly what we need, and that is sufficient grace. And so for me, as I think about my own story, there's some elements and ways that God has brought that sufficient grace into my life, ways that I want to encourage you in your own story. And so one of those ways that God has worked is through people. God was constantly working through people and still does, obviously, work through people all the time. He might be working through a neighbor, through a stranger, through a doctor, a coach, a parent. So God is constantly working. And one of the ways, there's so many different examples, but I'm thinking of my family, for example, that God was working through. Just different ways that they supported me. Mom would run me from doctor's appointments to therapy appointments to prosthetic appointments, all over the place. My twin Chris, I remember going back to school, and I didn't have prosthetic hands when I went back to school initially for the first several months. But thankfully, Chris being a twin, he's in my class. He's actually able to help me. He carries my tray. We sit down at the lunch table, and he starts to spoon feed me my lunch because I can't do it. Now, how selfless of Chris to be able to be willing to do that. But I saw God's grace through that and how he was working. God was working through my twin to meet the different needs in my life. And I could never really put into words what my family did for me and how God was working through them. But then I came across 1 John 4:18. And there it says that the perfect love drives out fear. That the perfect love casts out fear, depending on the version that you might read. And so how I saw that at work was through my family's unconditional love, because I was not able to do a whole lot for them, but they were able to come in and through their love meet the different needs in my life. And I didn't have to worry anymore. I didn't have to worry about, well, how am I going to tie my shoes? How am I going to get brushed, brush my teeth? How am I going to get dressed or brush my hair, comb my hair? Like whatever it is, I didn't have to worry about how to do those things. Through my family's love, though, they met those needs and drove out the fear and drove out the anxiousness in my life. Now, I don't love my family perfectly. They don't love me perfectly either. I don't know about your family, but how much more pure and it's powerful and perfect, it's truly perfect, God's love is for us. And then how much more should that be driving out the fear in our own lives? And in place of that fear, there's a peace, a security, a wholeness. That's what his grace is all about. We don't deserve that love. We could never earn it. We could never put in our place where we make God owe us his love, but he lavishes it on us, and that's what his grace is all about. And so I would just ask you, what are the people in your life that God has strategically placed in your life that you wouldn't be the person you are today if it wasn't for that individual or those people in your lives? Another way that I think God has worked through my own story would be through the opportunities that he's provided. Things that I thought were sure a closed door that I thought would never open, yet he seemed to create and make happen. And so one of those for me I think about is football. I thought for sure it was a closed door. I'd never play that again. In fact, I was actually praying to God while in high school, like, hey, God, would you just take this desire to play away from me, because it can't happen, it won't happen. And yet God instead opened that door. So my coach actually came to the hospital, my football coach, and he invited me to rejoin the team. And of course, at the time, I'm really hesitant. I'm like, I have no idea what this looks like, but I'm willing to at least try. And so I make it out to a practice one day, end of July. It's really hot and humid. And as I'm thirsty, I'd walk up to the trainers and I'd just say, hey, can I get a drink of water? Because I wasn't able to pick a water bottle up for myself. And they did that. They did that all practice long, actually. And then end of practice, I happened to see this water bottle actually sitting at my football coach's feet. And I pointed the water bottle out to my coach, thinking he would pick it up, just like the trainers have been doing for me the entire practice. Well, instead, my coach, he looks at the water bottle, looks up at me, looks down at the water bottle, and he thinks for a moment. And then he says something that would ultimately change my life. He said, if you are thirsty enough, you will find a way. I was shocked. I'm like, Coach, I don't have hands. You have hands. Like, why don't you pick up the water bottle? Jerk. Now, granted, I did not have the courage to say that out loud to my coach. Call me smart, but I wanted to really play it really bad, so I was trying to not be so rude. But my coach, I obviously didn't say that out loud, but my coach wasn't trying to be a jerk to me, and I knew that. But he had seen something that I didn't see, and that losing my hands was not the issue for me. It was just me thinking I couldn't do this. And so when I stepped back and let the emotion wear off for the second, I realized that he was trying to do something here, and that I could do this. And so I told him, I said, hey, Coach, you're right. I got this. And so I simply dropped down to my knees. I picked the water bottle up. I pulled the cap and squeezed. Like water never tasted so good. And so I pushed the cap closed. I tossed the water bottle back down to his feet with a big grin on my face, like, yeah, what's up now, Coach? I clearly was able to get a drink, but it was not until my coach challenged me that I began to see this for myself, that I could do more than I ever thought. And so it began. Every day, I started to challenge myself to find a way. And I knew it first started with my mindset. Just how I saw myself. I saw the obstacles and the different challenges around me. But that also included sticking with things and keep showing up to practice, which I did. And my coach, he said, we'd love to have you back as a middle linebacker. We don't know what that looks like, but show up one day. We'll just take it, one day at a time. And so I'm out there. I keep practicing. And one of the first things I had to figure out is what I was going to play with, because I actually was not allowed to use my prosthetic hands because the hand is actually made of metal. It's a steel hand. The referees apparently were a little bit worried I was going to use my arms as some type of club in the game and just start clubbing people to death with them. So I wasn't allowed to use those. Instead, I wore these foam pads. It's a plastic mold in my arm, and they put some foam around that, and they taped those pads onto my arms, and I go out and play like that. And the goal was to be the middle linebacker. My coach suggested the idea of me being a place kicker, so the guy that comes out kicks the extra point after a touchdown. I had never done any kicking before, but this was like the quickest way to get back onto the field. So I said yes, start working on this. I get a chance to kick in a game. Big moment. Northwest Ohio football is a big deal. And so I run out in the field that night. I get a standing ovation from our fans. They're all really supportive and super excited to watch this comeback moment. So I jog out there, and guys get the line of scrimmage. I'm taking my steps, 2 back, 1 to the left. As I get into position, complete silence over the entire stadium. I'm starting to feel a little nervous, and I give the nod for the ball to be snapped. I kick the ball, and I missed it. Right? Unbelievable. Ball does not go through the goalpost. It comes a couple of yards short, and you audibly could hear the response of the crowd, like this gasp of, oh! It was so heart-wrenching. And so, of course, I jog off. I'm really frustrated, and I'm thinking I'm going to have to work a little bit harder at this. And so I went back to practice that next week. Every day for 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, all I did was kick these extra points. And then I got a second opportunity the next game. Really big moment, jog back out there again. Fans are clapping for me. Guys get lined up. I'm taking my steps. I give the nod. It's a good snap. I kick the ball, and I miss it again. Whew. So I'm jogging off, and I get like the pity clap from the crowd this time. Like, it's okay. Just stick with it. Get it again next time. All that kind of. It's like, thanks, Grandma. That's not helpful. So I go back to practice. 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, and then I get a third opportunity. Jog out there, fans are clapping, everyone gets lined up. I give the nod, it's a good snap. I kick the ball, and this time I miss it again. Unbelievable. I do not want to do this again. I'm so embarrassed at this point. I just want to quit. And I don't know if you've ever had a scenario like that. Yeah, you just have a goal, maybe a dream or an expectation, and you just fall short. And you're like kind of wondering, like, can I do this? And I just want to encourage you to stick with it. God doesn't always show us the whole staircase, they say, right? It's just like one step at a time. I think oftentimes we would be overwhelmed and too fearful and just quit. So he's just going to take you through that. So what I did is put my trust and faith in him. It's like, God, if you want this to happen, you'll make it happen. And if not, there's something else that you have in store, and that's okay. So I did the one thing I knew to do, and that was go back to practice. Did that 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. I got a fourth opportunity. Jog back out there. The fans do not stand up and clap for me this time. They're like, are we supposed to keep clapping for him? It's kind of worn out the point at this point. So everyone gets lined up. I take my steps. I give the nod. I kick the ball, and I make it. Yes, finally, right? Yeah. Run off. I give my coach a big hug. And one of the first things he says, you're done kicking. I was like, yeah, you're right. That's understandable. So we had all these different goals. I was able to come back, though. I ended up playing as a middle linebacker, regaining that starting middle linebacker position, and end up leading my team with 111 tackles and earning even first team All-Ohio as a middle linebacker. It was a great year, really cool opportunity. But what I learned through that process is when you want something, you have to put your focus on it, you lean in, and you're relentless to go after it. You just persevere, and you find a way with God's help. So I would just ask you, kind of flipping this, what are those strategic opportunities that maybe God is presenting you, placing before you? Maybe it's a hard thing that you don't think you can do, you don't want to do maybe, but God is leading you through that pathway. And he wants to give you the grace, the means necessary to lift you up so that you wouldn't get the glory, but he would get the glory for it. So maybe it's just the chance to share an encouraging word with somebody. Maybe not just a friend, but a stranger. We all need encouraged every day. Maybe it's a chance to share your faith, lead a Sunday school group. What is that opportunity that God is using and wants to use in your life to bring the grace necessary to give you the strength? And then another way that I think, the last way I wanted to share with you this morning, the way I think that God works by bringing grace into our lives is certainly through his provision and the way he meets different needs of our lives. And hopefully we all have a track record of experiences that we can look back and say, yeah, God has really shown up here and there, and that we have that hope then to know that in the future he's going to show up and be there again when we need him. Hopefully also recognize we need him every day of our lives and not just in those desperate moments too. But for me, I've seen his provision in so many different ways. And one of those is actually having prosthetic hands. I get a lot of questions about them, so I'm going to put them back on. I'm going to show you how they work. And I want to have you guys demonstrate how they work as well. So what I'm putting on my arm here, this is a hand sanitizer. It's what I use every day to put the prosthetics on. Super slippery to push into the prosthetic. It evaporates pretty quickly as well, so that's super helpful, so my arm doesn't just want to fall off all the time. And these have internal batteries, so that's a button that I push to turn them on and shut them off. That button doubles as the charging port. So these have internal batteries that I have to charge up, and I do that at night. And I usually, don't sleep with them on. When I wake up, they're fully charged. And a charge, for the most part, will last all day. Sometimes it doesn't, and then it becomes a little awkward. Then I have to go like find an outlet and plug in for like 20 minutes just to get through the rest of my day, But it's all right. It works pretty well. All right. So they work off of certain muscles of my arm. I'll have you guys demonstrate the exact muscles that I'm actually using. So if you would hold up one of your arms in front of you, just like this. Just hold your arm up stationary. Right or left arm, just hold your arm up. Okay. And then bend your hand at your wrist. Bend your hand down. Very good. Bend your hand back up. Yep, you guys got it. And down. Yep, just like that. So you would literally be able to use a prosthetic hand like this. So this is what it is. There's two sensors built in the prosthetic, sensor in the top, sensor in the bottom. Skin contact, nothing inserted in my arm. As I bend what would be my hand down, the prosthetic closes. As I bend up, the prosthetic opens. It's really amazing technology. They work really well for me. There's different modes. I can move that thumb down to the bottom as well. I have a wrist rotator as well, so I can rotate my hand. I try not to rotate my hand backwards like this and point things out to people. They're like, oh, that's it's a little twisted, I guess you could say, right? But yeah, they're kind of fun. They enable me to do a lot. But there are challenges. I like being able to hold my wife's hand. I can't feel that. And even looking forward to holding my baby, and I'm not going to be able to feel that. So there are things that for sure, there are no replacements for the originals, but I am grateful to have them. And even beyond how God does, I think, provide for us in physical ways, tangible ways, materially, I think more important would be the immaterial things that God provides for us, like the hope that enables us to see beyond our circumstances, or the peace that surpasses understanding. And I don't know if you've ever experienced that peace in your life, but there's a really special moment that God showed up and really ministered to my heart when I needed it. It was actually this moment that I was actually laying on the couch at home. And as I was laying there alone, I started to think about some of the things that I wasn't able to do in my life anymore. Like at the time, play sports, being able to drive, simple things like being able to tie my own shoes or brush my teeth. And I felt overwhelmed by this and felt trapped. And I felt like that 500-ton power press was crushing down on me again, but this time on my heart and my spirit. And with these anxious thoughts, I just cried out loud and I said, why? Why, God? Why did you let this happen? And I don't know if you've ever asked similar questions in your own life, where you're confused at what God is doing, or maybe what he's not doing. Things aren't working out the way that you expected them to. I think we all face circumstances in life that we personally would never choose, and yet we still have to find a way through that. And yet in that moment, as I was praying and crying out to God, I felt a calmness come over me. I felt his peace. And it was almost as if Jesus was saying, Brad, I see you. I have got you. I'm with you. God brought peace in the midst of this tragedy. And God is one who makes peace. Not only does he want to give us an inner peace when tragedies like mine happen to us, but in an even bigger and I would say more important way, God wants to make peace with us. And as a church, I think we understand how he does that. He does that through Jesus, right? That Jesus came to this earth some 2,000 years ago as God in human form. And he lived this perfect, sinless life for you and for me that we could never live out. But even beyond that, he gave up his life, dying on a cross in as our place, as our substitute, paying the price for our rebellion against God. But what gives me hope above all of that is that when Jesus was killed 3 days later, he comes back to life, demonstrating that he, in fact, is God. And he has the power, the ability to bring us into right relationship with God. This is the most significant way that God provides for us. We see his provision in this, that he has made a way to himself. And so, church, I hope you've been encouraged this morning to consider the story in your own life that God is using and writing through his grace, through the different people in your life, through the opportunities that he's providing, and certainly through his provision. That I don't know how you've walked in through here today, this morning. This might be a season of rejoicing. Life is going really well and you're in a good rhythm, but this also might be the opposite for you right now. Maybe it's a season of loss. Maybe it's a season where God feels distant and you're not hearing from him. Maybe you have more questions, you have answers right now. Wherever you find yourself, there is a constant invitation from Jesus that Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary and carry heavy burdens. I will give you rest, rest for your souls." And so we can find that rest. I oftentimes in the schools talk about how to find a way, and Jesus is the way. And he himself said that. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." That no one else will you find this truth except in me. And so I hope that you can realize the power of what Jesus can do in our own stories, and you can tap into that this morning if you don't or you aren't doing that right now. But one of the ways I try to live out this grace in my life today is through a ministry. And I get the opportunity to speak into schools and to do these evening events all the time through a ministry called Stand for Truth. And we'll have a table set up in the back out there, and maybe some of you that saw that come through. But I often get a lot of questions about what it is that I do in full-time ministry. And so what I did is just to put together 5 frequently asked questions. And so I want to kind of simply run through those just to kind of explain what that is and how we operate. So the first question that is often asked, what's your mission field? So our mission field are public middle schools and high schools, not just in Northwest Ohio, but all across the United States. So the second question is asked, what is the vision of your specific ministry? Our vision is to reach unchurched students in public schools with the gospel. It's as simple as that. Now, you think about hearing gospel, public schools together, like how does that jive today? Well, we follow a very simple 2-step strategy. So as I mentioned, I get invited in as a public speaker into the schools to do a full school assembly. Now, because it's during the day, I can't share my faith, but this is where step 2 comes in. I have an artist, a musical artist that travels with me. They perform during the assembly, and then we invite the students back that night for a free concert at the school. And it's there that I'm able to share my faith. I challenge students to turn to Jesus and put their faith and trust in him. Now, at that concert, we have other resources. We invite churches just like this, to be a part of that. They have a chance to come up on stage, share about their church, how the students get plugged into that local church where they can further grow in their relationship with Jesus. We hand out free resources. We hand out Bibles, copies of my book as well that we hand out, and things like this to remind them of the things that they learned that day. So the third question that is often asked, is the ministry making an impact on students? And I would say yes, for sure. There's all kinds of things that we see and experience through this. Maybe a quick story or a quote, actually, from social media that I'd received. This is actually a girl from Northwest Ohio. She said, "That was the best concert ever. I really liked what you said, Brad. Can you help me pray to God and ask him into my heart? How do I commit my life to him?" It was really special and powerful because not only do we see lives change at the concert, but following afterwards, things like this, where students will ask more questions and connect with us. And so, yes, we're definitely seeing an impact how God is using our ministry to reach students. How is the ministry funded? So we are like most missionaries, in which it's our responsibility to seek out a team of people who not only believe in the ministry, but also want to partner with us financially. It is a financial support team that we rely on to really helps us, enables us to travel, sharing the gospel with students all over the country. And I'm really excited. The last question here is often asked, how can we help? I am so glad you asked. So there are honestly 2 ways that I would encourage you if you are interested in partnering with us. One is through prayer. Would you pray for us? This really is an ocean of an opportunity to do this. There's 80-some thousand public schools, 90-some thousand public schools all across the nation. And so there's an ocean opportunity. And then 2, financially. We have a goal. Our goal this year is to reach 200 partners giving $20 a month. And so I would just simply ask, and I'm so grateful to be able to ask, would you consider being a part of this team of Stand for Truth, taking the gospel to students in public schools by giving $20 a month? And we are going to actually have the opportunity to do that, partner with us today. There are some cards here that are going to be passed out. I think there's some, okay, you guys have the cards. So there are going to be some cards passed out. Everyone, or at least one individual per household can grab a card. That'd be great. We're going to watch this short video, and then I'll just come up, briefly explain that card, and then we'll transition, I think, to a final song here at the end. So we can play that video as they pass these cards out.
What makes this ministry so awesome is the fact that they come into the schools, to their actual place where they are 8 hours plus a day, and they're bringing the message of Christ to them.
Our speaker today is a true inspiration. His story has been featured in the national news media, including ESPN and the New York Times. Please welcome Brad Hurtig.
He's an amazing person to listen to. Some of the stories that he had, like when he was on his ATV and he accelerated too quickly.
The four-wheeler took off, throwing me back, pulling both of my arms out of my prosthetics and leaving the prosthetics attached to the handlebars.
Brad was great today. Kids were on the edge of their seats. You could have heard a pin drop.
The format that they provide of having assembly earlier in the day is just a genius idea because it gets them drawn in. And then later on that evening when they have the concert, it brings these students back. In terms of technology and in terms of media, with lighting, with sound, it's top-notch. Definitely appealing to a generation that's full of technology. If a student comes, they're going to hear the message of Christ plain and clear. It's not a roundabout message, it's not just scratching the surface, it's the real deal.
He lived for you, he died for you, and he rose for you. What would keep you from turning to Jesus and asking him to save you?
The Plain Cities concert was incredible.
It was really fun.
Amazing.
Ecstatic.
Awesome.
Very moving. It hit home. It made me think maybe I should go to church.
When they go to a school, they are truly presenting the message of Christ, and these kids are hearing it, and many kids are saying yes, that they want Christ as their Savior and Lord.
We have churches represented here tonight. If you're willing to learn more, get connected to a church.
If you want an opportunity for your teenagers to be changed, to have a place where they can bring their friends who don't know Christ, to a place where they will hear about Christ, this is the way to do it.
So I'll just quickly run through this card, and the card there's actually two. So that business card, you can actually pull that black card off, and you can keep that. That's my contact information. If you ever want to get a hold of me or ask more questions, you're welcome to do that. And then on this gray card, there are a couple of options. One, if you want to pray for us and just kind of stay up to date on where we are, you can check that first box, receive a newsletter that's emailed out about every other month, and then just simply put your name and email address on there, and then you can drop that off at our table. But if you do want to join and be part of one of those 200 partners, and support us financially, you can also do that by checking that next box. And then there's different amounts on here. You got the 20, the 40, the triple at $60. And if you are kind of curious, like you really want to support us, you're not sure which amount you want to partner with us, and you're looking for advice, I'd say go for the triple. So that's just me, but you're welcome. But yeah, if you can just go ahead and check that and then fill out the rest of the card as clearly as possible. And then how we do it at Stand for Truth is we attach a voided check to this, drop that off at that table, and then your donation would be transferred on the 20th of every month. If you ever need to make a change or cancel that in any way, you just let us know. We'd be glad to be able to do that for you. Also, if you're like me and you don't carry your checkbook today with you, that is quite okay. You can simply fill out the card, bring that back, and then we'll give you an envelope, and then you can mail in a voided check at your convenience. We do receive one-time donations if you're not able to partner with us financially. Our bills come monthly, so we just try to encourage the monthly support, but we'd gladly receive the one-time donation too. I also have copies of my book. These are at the table as well. If you give a donation of any amount, we'd just be glad to say thank you and put a book in your hands as well. So we appreciate that. These donations aren't something to replace your giving at your local church here. This is something we'd receive above and beyond your local giving here, but we are grateful for your consideration in that. I know that was a lot of information I just threw at you, so if you have any questions at all, be sure to stop back, say hi to the table. Love to meet and connect with you. And with that, I think we'll turn it over to Jack, or is it going into a song? You're going to go into a song here. But we'll be available. My wife and I would love to connect with you afterwards. So it's been a pleasure to be with you this morning, and hope you guys have been encouraged through the story and even through our ministry as you think about the good news being shared. We're so grateful for your partnership. Thank you.